Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, China is stockpiling oil and gold, raising questions and concerns about preparations for an invasion of Taiwan.
It's possible. People are worried about it. There's a lot of talk about it, up at the most senior levels of the U.S. government and the Pentagon.
Taiwan reports renewed Chinese military activity near the island. This comes just days after Beijing wrapped up its provocative two-day war games. North Korea making a rare criticism against its biggest ally, China. That's after Beijing joined two of its neighbors in discussing denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And an NYPD officer has been fired amid explosive allegations of spying for the Chinese Communist Party. More on the details. Beefing up gold reserves, stockpiling oil imports, and kicking off massive drills. The series of actions from China is kicking up questions, including the biggest: is Beijing preparing to invade Taiwan? China just wrapped up a massive drill encircling Taiwan last week, 3 days after the island's new president was sworn in. The U.S. Indo-Pacific commander said Wednesday the Chinese drills, quote, looked like a rehearsal for an invasion. He added that U.S. forces monitored the Chinese drills and that learning about them would help the U.S. prepare for the future. The Chinese Communist Party considers Taiwan part of its territory despite never having ruled it. A Chinese military expert said the recent exercises practice cutting off Taiwan's connection to the outside world. The expert described Taiwan as an isolated island. He noted its economy relies on exports and that Taiwan gets its energy supplies through imports. He pointed out that if China were to cut off the island's trade routes, Taiwan's economy could collapse. What's more, Chinese leader Xi Jinping inspected a military medical university in China last month. Xi called on students and military staffers there to, quote, focus on the battlefield. 3 months into 2024, China's central bank held the title of world's leading buyer of gold. The country has been shoring up its gold reserves for over a year. In 2023, China added over 200 tons of gold to its reserves, the largest increase since 1977. China also boosted its crude oil stockpile for the first 2 months of 2024. It added over 500,000 barrels a day to its strategic reserve. China has also made some long-term moves. In 2022, China's Xi ordered a leadership reshuffle. Now, 60% of the leader's cabinet members have Taiwan-related experience. China also has been reducing its shares of U.S. Treasury bonds from over $1 trillion in 2018 to around $800 billion this year, a 25% drop. The move could make it harder for the U.S. to seize China's reserves during a war. That's according to an op-ed from a former director for intelligence of the Indo-Pacific Command. Tensions are rising as China stockpiles gold and oil. Is war on the horizon amid escalating tensions around Taiwan? Or are these moves strategic maneuvers to enhance self-reliance? Lessons learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. To discuss, we sat down with Anders Core, publisher at the Journal of Political Risk and the principal of Core Analytics. Anders Core, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Now, China has been stockpiling resources like gold and oil, leading some to think that China could be preparing for war, given all the tensions we're seeing around Taiwan especially. What's your view on all of this?
First of all, a lot of those numbers are self-reported by China, so we don't really know what's going on. I wouldn't ever suggest that we should be somnolent or remiss in terms of dealing with the risks from China. But I do think that these numbers, we need to look more closely at them. First of all, the recent change is from about 63 to about 73 million troy ounces. 73 million troy ounces, which is what China currently has in its reserves, according to self-reporting, is about 2,500 tons. That is about 1%. That's just 1% of total global gold supplies. If we think about the fact that China has moved from about 0.8% of total global gold supplies to about 1% It's not a massive change. China's a lot more invested in US dollars than it is in gold. Now, why do we see a little bit of an increase in gold recently? There could be 100 reasons. For example, if China knows in advance that Russia is going to go to war in Ukraine, it can increase its gold supply, its gold reserves. If China knows that Iran is going, or Hamas is going to attack Israel, it could increase its gold. So China's oil reserves are slight, again, a very small increase relative to its total supply. Another reason why China's oil reserves might be increasing slightly is because its economy isn't doing as well. So it's not burning as much oil. So instead of refining that oil, it puts it into its reserve. So, a Taiwan scenario or a Taiwan conflict is not the only reason that it could be increasing some of these reserves.
On that note, especially when it comes to all these increasing conflicts we're seeing around the world, still others are saying that these moves by China are to boost their self-reliance. We're seeing China try to do similar things when it comes to semiconductors to make their own industry self-reliant instead of, relying on Taiwan and even the U.S. How do you read that move?
China definitely wants as much independence as it can get globally. Certainly semiconductor development is part of that. It's a security measure. It doesn't mean for sure that China is going to war with Taiwan. From a strategic perspective, often in Chinese history, China will, or the successful warring states in Chinese history stood out of conflicts and encouraged other states nearby to get into conflicts and get into wars. Those other states would destroy themselves, and then there'd be a power vacuum into which a Chinese state could expand its control, territory, and power. For example, if the US and Russia got into a war, both countries would be a lot weaker, and China could, if China was able to reserve its resources and trade relationships and GDP, it could then expand into that power vacuum. So again, I think we need to be very careful about drawing too many conclusions from semiconductors, gold, and oil as to what China is going to do in Taiwan, for example, in terms of launching a war. It's possible. People are worried about it. There's a lot of talk about it, up at the most senior levels of the U.S. government and the Pentagon. So I don't think we can discount the risk entirely. I just don't think that we can extrapolate from some of these resource purchases and semiconductor investments that China's definitely going to take action.
Anders Kaur, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Alarm bells are ringing in Taiwan. The island's defense ministry reported dozens of Chinese warplanes and ships nearby on Wednesday, carrying out combat readiness patrols. Taiwan's defense ministry said it detected 28 Chinese military aircraft operating around Taiwan Wednesday afternoon local time. The ministry said over 60% of the planes crossed the Taiwan Strait's median line or areas nearby. The median line serves as an unofficial border between Taiwan and mainland China. The incursion comes less than a week after Beijing ended 2 days of war games. Beijing said the drills were to punish Taiwan's new president for backing Taiwan independence. A senior official with Taiwan's National Bureau said Beijing's goal was to intimidate but not go to war. The Chinese Communist Party sees Taiwan as part of its territory despite never having ruled the island. The regime has repeatedly threatened to take Taiwan by force. A show of support for Taiwan, a second U.S. Senate delegation arrived in Taiwan Wednesday. The group is led by Senators Tammy Duckworth and Dan Sullivan. This comes days after a visit by a U.S. House delegation led by Representative Michael McCall, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Your visit showcases the robust relations between Taiwan and the U.S. I'm also really looking forward to continuing to receive support from the U.S. government and Congress.
The lawmakers' visits come after China finished off massive drills surrounding Taiwan. In the meantime, Taiwan's president is also facing internal chaos. The opposition parties that favor close ties with China hold the majority in parliament, and they just passed a bill that some worry could limit the president's powers. Next, let's zoom in on the latest updates on the debate raging inside Taiwan's parliament. Taiwan's government said it will reject a parliamentary reform bill and send it back for review. Lawmakers passed the legislation Tuesday, but the measure is facing mass protests from Taiwanese citizens. Many protesters are concerned there could be Chinese influence behind the bill.
There was no discussion on the legislation this time, and these bills are rough. Without detailed discussions, these incomplete bills will do Taiwan a great disservice.
Does this favor China? Yeah, of course. China loves, when there's disruptions in democracy.
If the legislation passes, Taiwan lawmakers would gain more power to ask the military, private companies, or individuals to disclose information, and the parliament would have the power to punish those who fail to cooperate. Analysts say the measures could hurt Taiwan's democracy. The new president of Taiwan doesn't have majority in parliament, with lawmakers from the two main opposition parties having pushed the bill. What's more, experts say Beijing hopes to influence Taiwan's politics and split public opinion on the island, and eventually to take control of Taiwan without having to declare war. Beijing has repeatedly condemned Taiwan's new president, William Lai, for supporting independence. Meanwhile, Beijing favors the island's opposition parties, as they are traditionally more open to working with China. North Korea won't give an inch when it comes to expanding its nuclear arsenal, even if its close friend China wants it to. Instead, Pyongyang condemned China, Japan, and South Korea for pushing the country to call its warheads. The top officials from China, Japan, and South Korea on Monday released a joint declaration. In it, they discussed the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang condemned China and the other two countries, describing their aim as a grave political provocation that violates North Korean sovereignty. Beijing responded to Pyongyang's criticism the next day, saying China's position on the matter remains unchanged, without specifying a push to denuclearize. China is North Korea's only military ally and its largest trade partner. China and Russia have called on the UN to ease sanctions on North Korea. A U.S. appeals court is slated to hear legal challenges to a law that could potentially ban TikTok. The case is set for oral arguments in September. NTD's Dawn Ma has more with Business Matters. Earlier last month, President Biden signed a bill that would force TikTok to divest from its Chinese parent company ByteDance or else face removal from U.S. app stores. The law gives TikTok until January 19th to sever ties with its Chinese owner.
The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia scheduled oral arguments for September following requests for an expedited hearing from TikTok, ByteDance, as well as a group of TikTok content creators and along with the DOJ under the appeals court schedule. The creators, TikTok and ByteDance, must file legal briefs by June 20th and the Department of Justice by July 26th, with reply briefs due by August 15th. So the potential TikTok ban is driven by worries among U.S. lawmakers that China could access data on Americans or spy on them with the app.
A Chinese police officer recently got a pink slip in New York after allegations of spying for the Chinese Communist Party. Published documents from last week showed that the New York City Police Department fired a Chinese officer in February. He has not been criminally charged. The story was first reported last week by media outlet Documented, which cited NYPD disciplinary records. Lee was found guilty of lying to the FBI during interviews and failed to report these matters to the NYPD for at least 2 years. Steve Lee was appointed to the department years ago. He was suspended without pay this January due to the spy accusations. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform Epoch TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Just click the link down below. Here's what to look out for in our second half. China sending 2 young giant pandas to Washington's National Zoo. News of their incoming arrival comes just months after the zoo had to send back 3 pandas amid rising U.S.-China tensions. China's latest military drills surrounding Taiwan, are they a prelude to an invasion or a high-stakes bluff? We have expert insights. The Philippines president reacting strongly to a new Chinese rule. The regulation set to kick in next month allows Chinese Coast Guard troops to detain any foreigner they suspect of trespassing in the South China Sea. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.